Welcome to another edition of Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here at the News Forum. We discuss economic analysis, business news, and of course, the future of our country. The leadership race of the Conservative Party is happening in the wake of an unprecedented healthcare, economic, and social challenges in our time. And it will require, as a result, a leader with extraordinary skills to come up with the solutions and solutions in an uncertain political environment. We're very pleased to have as a guest today on Boom and Bust one of those leadership candidates. Erin O'Toole is the Member of Parliament for Durham riding in the GTA. He was first elected in the year 2012 in a by-election and then was re-elected on two separate occasions. He was born in Montreal. He is a veteran of the Canadian Armed Forces and a lawyer. He served as Minister of Veterans Affairs in the Harper cabinet along with myself, so I know him as a cabinet colleague, and it is my pleasure to welcome Erin O'Toole to the program today. Welcome, Erin.
Good to be with you, Tony.
COVID promises to be disruptive and continues to be disruptive in many facets of society and, of course, in the economy, probably for the foreseeable future. How do you see Canada coping with the economic challenges, and how would you assess the Liberal government's approach to this so far?
Well, certainly the COVID pandemic caused both a health crisis immediately, shocked our system and tested its readiness for this type of pandemic. And then the economic crisis has been a direct result, which I think will have a much more lasting and sustained impact on our country, our wealth, the well-being of our citizens. And I'm really worried about the economic aspects now and making sure we're ready for a second or even a tertiary wave of the virus. So if I'd assess the response, I think the Liberal response was slow and confused, both on the health side, because they were 2 months late, stopping flights from China, for example, closing our border, restricting the ability for more cases to get into Canada. The Liberals' slow foot-dragging approach made the crisis 2 or 3 times as bad as it would have been. You look at any of the patterns, those international flights allowed for far more community spread than there would have been. Then the economic crisis, they got everything backwards, Tony. They created the emergency response benefit with virtually no parameters around it for qualification, and then got that in place first and encouraged employers to actually not retain people. They screwed up the wage subsidy. There's very little support in terms of rent support for small and medium businesses. So as businesses were entering a crisis, rather than preserving jobs, they shed them, knowing people would go on the CERB benefit. So we had 10 million plus people on a benefit that really should have been a last resort. We should have saved as many jobs as we could have. So they got both the health and the economic response backwards, in my view, and we're paying the price for it.
We've seen with the economic statement recently that the Canadian deficit is around $342 billion, I believe. The lasting debt is around $1.2 trillion. Shocking numbers. What was your reaction to those numbers?
Staggering numbers, Tony. 343, but what's a billion between friends, right? And that amounts to $26,000 roughly per second over the course of the crisis in spending by the government. And the parliamentary budget officer forecast a $250, $260 billion deficit. So the spending was so massive and there was no parliamentary oversight. There's almost $100 billion that we can't account for because they're not leveling a budget. It's not an economic update. It's a snapshot. Well, this is a sort of a horror snapshot where we don't get to see any of the details behind it. But we now have a lot of questions. We saw the multi-million-dollar WE contract awarded by Justin Trudeau to his friends. It's now the third investigation of the Prime Minister personally by the Ethics Commissioner. What other boondoggles, what other close friends of the Liberal Party, the old expression, who you know in the PMO, who was there at the trough? Because now there's tens of billions of dollars more than even the PBO expected.
We'll leave it at that before our first commercial break. Erin O'Toole, it's great to have you on the program. We've got lots of questions to come, so hold tight, and we'll be back after this break.
I think the most important thing is just educating yourself and listening to other people's opinions. I think even if you have your own strong opinions, I think it's so important to listen to other people's. Even if you consider yourself a closed-minded person, left or right, I think it's important to listen to the other side, and I think that's how we can be inclusive and respectful.
Welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement. With me today is the Honourable Erin O'Toole, leadership candidate for the Conservative Party of Canada. Erin, thank you again for being part of our show today. We were talking a little bit about the economic response and the economic statement that has come out of the federal government. One of the analyses of that statement indicates that perhaps we will be in for a rough ride, or the viewers will be in for a rough ride, because it does perhaps predict increases in interest rates. Is that one of the things that you're worried about when you see deficit numbers like this?
Absolutely. The two big things I fear, Tony, when, as I said, the deficit hit stratospheric levels that even a few weeks ago we thought were impossible. Interest rates, a rise in interest rates, meaning the cost on borrowing for the average family in Ontario or in Alberta, Atlantic Canada, goes up, and we could see after mortgage provisions extending mortgage payments and things like that. After that ends, if we see long unemployment and we see interest rate increases, we could see more personal bankruptcies, these sorts of things. The other thing that scares me, Tony, is, of course, this is the Liberals. Higher taxes. They were raising taxes on people, on small businesses, on farming families, on alcohol. They put in an automatic tax increase on alcohol, on the sharing economy. All of that was being done when they were only running about a $20 billion structural deficit. What taxes will they increase when they're running a $343 billion deficit? So interest rates and taxes are what I think Canadians should be worried about with the Trudeau government.
Well, and it's interesting you should say that, because earlier on this program, perhaps a month and a half, 2 months ago, we had Pierre Poilievre on, and he was in fact predicting a hike in the HST. So there may be some unpleasant surprises in the future for Canadians.
Yes, I think that's for certain. We've seen how the Liberals have structured their entire narrative on anyone that has a dual income family in the suburbs of the 905 in Ontario is so-called the 1% in their view, and need to pay more for the middle class and those working hard to join it. You remember those lines, Tony, that they used to say it all the time. They have a minister for middle class prosperity who can't even define what the middle class is. So they're going to tax any working family, both in consumption taxes and in personal income taxes, and they will likely remove more of the ways to avoid paying tax, like the tax-free savings account. They cut those in their first budget a few years ago. We could even see RRSPs at risk. They may even curtail OAS and other programs once their spending capacity is limited.
Now, of course, you're running for the leadership of the Conservative Party of Canada. That's one of the reasons why you're on this show. And you've got an obligation not only to critique what Mr. Trudeau is doing, but also propose solutions, different paths. When you look at the economy in the midst of this COVID crisis, what sorts of things would you like to see happen that would help alleviate some of the concerns of the average person?
Well, two things, Tony. First, we have to save small business. Small and medium-sized businesses largely were left out of all this billions of COVID spending. If you were an owner-operator, restaurant or nail salon, these sorts of things, you basically were missed by the business loan. You probably got zero rent assistance. I've got dozens of businesses like this in my riding in Durham where people have burned through their savings because they've had to pay rent with the emergency business, their CERB payments. And so you'll see a cascading of small and medium-sized businesses either going out of business or teetering on the edge of insolvency. So I have a plan to save small business, right from direct assistance in terms of loans, making the ones that missed Trudeau's loans qualify, also changing our restructuring regime, allowing more of them to restructure with some support from the government rather than just liquidate. Because here's the reality, Tony. 2/3 of Canadians work for a small or medium-sized business. If we have a large number of them fail, we will have prolonged unemployment. The second thing, I want a private sector boom. We need to eliminate all the ideological laws and regulations of the Trudeau government. Bill C-69, their anti-pipeline approach, their tanker ban. Our resources are the best in the world. They're the highest standards from human rights, environment, Indigenous engagement. Canadian resources should be the choice for the free world. And I'm going to promote that along with manufacturing in Ontario, bringing some jobs back from China. If we have a strong private sector recovery and we tackle this massive overspending by the Liberals, we'll be okay in the long term. But if we let more reckless Trudeau spending happen, we will have a debt crisis on the horizon.
There's lots to unpack there. We are going to do that. We've got some segments left of this program. Hang in there. It's great to have Erin O'Toole on the program. We're going to come back to Erin after this commercial break. Thanks for watching.
Like just experiencing like everyone's like unique cultures, and like that could involve like celebrating their holidays or enjoying festivities or events that certain like ethnic like cultures would celebrate.
Welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here at the News Forum. With me today is the Honourable Erin O'Toole. He's running for the leadership of the Conservative Party of Canada. Erin, thanks again for being on our program. It's great to have you. I want to unpack something that you just referenced before the break, and that's China. Of course, the big elephant in the room, or panda in the room, I guess, whichever your metaphor is. But the increasing, rising aspect of China being a malevolent power. I said in one of my recent broadcasts that 20 years ago, China was was invited into the WTO, and everybody thought at the time this was a way to have China join the international community and soften some of the rough edges of internal Chinese as well as external Chinese politics. Well, the absolute reverse has happened since that time, and China is trying to bend to its will a lot of these multilateral institutions that we thought were going to soften the edges. So how do you see China operating in the world today? I know you've been very outspoken on some of these issues. And what should Canada be doing about them?
We have to look at China in reality and not in the fiction that Mr. Trudeau lives in with his admiration for the basic dictatorship. The modern China, as you outlined beautifully, Tony, gamed the international system. So the democratic world supported their entry into the World Trade Organization, thinking that it was going to help them follow the rules-based approach globally, perhaps work on human rights, engage more with the world rather than being cut off. Instead, China has actually manipulated the rules-based order to their own benefit, and their record on human rights, whether the Uyghurs at home or whether Hong Kong and other places abroad, has become worse. So we have to work with our allies, particularly the Five Eyes, the US, UK, Australia, New Zealand, to apply pressure both on trade, on human rights. And I really do think we have to push for reform of a lot of these international institutions that have been corrupted. The World Health Organization, I asked about this 2 years ago in the House of Commons about how China had manipulated pandemic planning. We see the result today, sadly. So it's time for the free world to stop allowing the bad actors of the world to game the system.
When you look at there is an increasing movement for a great disengagement in terms of supply chain from China. That's happening on personal protective equipment. It's happening in critical minerals. Is this something where Canada also should play a role?
Yes, 100%. And, some of the groups over the years that have worked on child labor and blood diamonds and all these sorts of things, somehow China has gotten a bit of a free pass in this dialogue. And if you look at their record, it's one of the most egregious. So what we should do is push back, and this economic pushback might actually have China make good decisions for a change, as opposed to having the best of both worlds. They operate as a communist dictatorship and then take advantage of global bodies and the normalization of relations. So I think free trade amongst free countries is something I've been talking about for some time, where we, within the free world, trade steel and aluminum and auto parts, more than allowing bad actors to come in, because we've seen, whether with Chinese steel and aluminum in particular, they have circumvented the system, and it's hurt Hamilton, it's hurt Kitimat, BC, Saguenay, Quebec, and our auto sector in Ontario. So enough is enough. We need to rebalance the global trade flow.
Do you consider yourself a free trader?
I do. I consider myself a free trader amongst free countries. And if you have a rules-based approach to trade, you cannot tolerate manipulation of that. So we should have been working with the US administration, actually going back to the Obama administration and then to the Trump administration, on Chinese dumping of steel, Chinese supply of aluminum ingots into Mexico, which Trudeau just allowed to be locked into the new NAFTA agreement. That hurts our aluminum supply in Canada, which is the cleanest, most ethical in the world. And Tony, as more auto parts manufacturers switch to aluminum for EVs and more modern vehicles, we are slowly going to be boxing ourselves out of the auto parts market, which, as you know, in Ontario is a huge part of our provincial economy. So we should be excluding China from many of these trade arrangements. And I think pushing the US in that direction to work with countries within the TPP, within the sort of NATO, Five Eyes democratic world, I think there needs to be a rebalancing of trade.
We're going to continue on with a discussion about the trade aspect of it. We're going to take a short commercial break, but we will be right back after that. So stay tuned.
Because I feel it's pretty important to just not only look at one source of information, just to, like, you have a whole wide world of information out there, so you have more than one place to look for. So if you're making your own decision out of just one source of information, then okay, that's fine, and you are making it yourself, but you're just looking in one spot. So it's always good to just have the whole story before judging and saying you already have the whole story in your head.
Welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement. We have with us today the Honourable Erin O'Toole, Conservative Party leadership candidate, and we're talking economics. There's many other aspects to his platform, I'm sure, but let's stick to our script here at Boom and Bust. Erin, thank you for being part of this program. I wanted to continue on about trade for a second, because you, for many years, well before running for leader, you've talked about the amazing club of English-speaking economies and how you wanted to see greater and stronger diplomatic and political relations, but also trade relations. Why don't you tell the audience a little bit about that?
Well, absolutely. And in our case, it's English and French speaking, as you know, Tony. But the CANZEC movement is something that's very exciting. I've been talking about for about 4 years now. And it's really a movement that started in Canada by a Brit expat. And CANZEC stands for Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and UK, 4 of the Five Eyes countries, Commonwealth partners, partners that have fought together, died together on the battlefield, that have familial ties, the same sovereign rule of law. We should be doing more internationally together. We should be doing more exchange of trade and people, as well as security partnerships, defense partnerships. I've been talking about this, and there's real excitement now because post-Brexit, Boris Johnson is looking at trade enhancement with Australia and New Zealand. But of course, with Trudeau, we're not at the table. We've seen a decline of our relations with all countries of the world under the Liberals. I really think doing more with our closest allies, showing how rules-based trade, human rights, respect for institutions, that should be how we show an aspirational multilateralism, as opposed to some of the bad actors at the UN. We should have a more exclusive approach, doing more with our best friends.
I noticed that the UK and Australia are fast-tracking the post-Brexit free trade agreement. I don't sense that Canada is doing the same thing right now.
No, and it's unfortunate. The Liberal Party and Justin Trudeau himself pinned his foreign policy plans on two things: a free trade agreement with China. How has that one gone? Just look at the situation with the two Michaels, and the UN Security Council seat bid, which was a dramatic failure by Trudeau. So in the process of these exclusive priorities of the Liberals, we've actually hurt our existing strong relations, both with Australia, New Zealand, the UK, the US, countries like Japan, when Trudeau was a no-show at the leaders' meetings in Vietnam for the Trans-Pacific Partnerships. That sent ripples around the world. And of course, Tony, we all remember the Prime Minister's state visit to India. That gave the late night shows in the US tons of material, just Trudeau embarrassing our country with the world's largest democracy. As you know, you were directly involved. We grew trade and grew the relationship with India when we were in government. And it's been sad to see that relationship and many others atrophy under Justin Trudeau.
We've got about a minute left. I hate to do this, but I do want to talk about pipelines. I know how important it is to a very strong segment of our economy. How would you get those pipelines going and ensuring that it also has the social license needed for environmental concerns?
A National Strategic Pipelines Act. Any pipeline that takes the Canadian resource, our resource, to tidewater or to refinement capability will be fast-tracked by cabinet approval upfront, giving the certainty to the capital investment, to the company making that investment. Afterwards, the social license can be assured in the highest ways, highest degree of environmental mitigation, Indigenous engagement. I want us to become a spill mitigation leader for our West Coast, our wonderful BC coastline. This is where federal government investments, as we deem it to be in the national interest, will not just get pipelines built, but will also show we're going to be the strongest environmental stewards at the same time.
That was even under a minute. Thank you for that. And thank you for being on our program. Lots to talk about, of course. These issues are not going anywhere. But thank you, Erin O'Toole, Conservative Party leadership candidate, for being on Boom and Bust today. Thanks.
Look forward to coming back. Thank you, Tony.
Sure. The Conservative leadership contest is happening at a very auspicious time, or inauspicious when it comes to the economy of Canada. It was great to hear Erin O'Toole and his thoughts on the economy and the future. And of course, these issues are not going to go away either for the Conservative Party or for the governing Liberals. So stay tuned for new programs on these matters.